In this demo, I'm going to create an ASP.NET MVC web application with Visual Studio and Azure AD with using the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. And once the app is created, I then am going to add some necessary packages and libraries that support user authentication and requesting data from Microsoft Graph. Now I'm going to start by opening up Visual Studio and going to create a brand new project. The project that I'm going to create is going to be a web application. So I'm going to choose a web application for the .NET framework and then select Next. And then I'm going to choose, give it a name of Graph Tutorial. I'm going to store that in my C/D dev folder. And we're going to use the .NET framework version 4.8. I'm then going to select an MVC app as the type of web application and then select Create. And I'm going to let Visual Studio go about creating my project. Now before moving on, I want to update the Bootstrap NuGet package and install some additional packages. And let me explain what each one of these packages are going to be. So first, I'm going to update the Bootstrap package. So I'll say update package Bootstrap. I'm then going to install the package Microsoft.owen.host.systemweb. What that's going to be used for is to enable the Owen interfaces on the ASP.NET application. I'm then going to do another install package for the Microsoft.owen.security.openid connect package. This is going to be for doing OpenID Connect authentication with Microsoft Azure. And then I'm going to install the package Microsoft.owen.security.cookies. That's going to be to enable cookie-based authentication. We're going to install another package for Microsoft.identity.client. That's going to be for the Microsoft Authentication Library. And then I'm also going to install the package Microsoft.graph. I'm going to make sure I install a specific version of 3.32.0, and that's going to be for making calls to Microsoft Graph. All right, so now with all those packages installed, I'm now going to come over to my project and we're going to add in a new item. So I'm going to add in a new item, and the item that I'm looking for is this Owen startup class. I'm going to remove the one and just say add. All right, so now I have my startup class has been added. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add another class to my project in the models folder. So I'm going to say add a class, and this class is going to be an alert.cs, and I'm going to add in a couple of parameters to it, or a couple of members to it. A key, an alert key, a message, and a debug. And we can actually paste in a little bit too much, so we'll go ahead and get rid of some of that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to modify the primary view of our application. So I'm going to go to the shared_layout CSHTML file, and I'm just going to paste in a bunch of stuff here into my project and save my changes. This is just going to change the basic UX for my app. All this code really does is just add Bootstrap for some simple styling and Font Awesome for some simple icons, and it also defined a global layout with a nav bar and use the alert class to display any alerts. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to modify the CSS. So I'm going to open up the site.css file in my content, and I will paste all of that in, save our changes, and then the next thing that we'll do is I'm also going to modify our home view for our index, the index view for our home controller. So I'm going to open up index.cshtml, and I'll just paste in some content as well. And again, just adding in a home link, and I'm adding in a little bit of information about the current user if they're authenticated. And the sign-in link is going to be there for users if they're not already authenticated. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a base controller. So I'm going to come back over here to our controllers, and I'm going to add in a new controller. I'm going to call this empty controller. I'm going to give it a name of base controller, and I'm just going to give it some base just this one base method, this flash method, that's going to display the error or the alert if there is one on our UI. The next thing we want to do is I'm going to switch the home controller to inherit from the base controller in the same folder there. All right, now let's test everything out. So I need to make sure I save all my changes, and I'll go ahead and test everything out. So we'll build it. And so here you can see our app is now loaded and everything is loading just fine. We can also get ready to sign in as well, but we need an Azure AD app to do that first. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go create that app. Now what we're going to do is create our Azure AD web app registration using the Azure AD Admin Center. So the first thing I need to do is I need to determine the ASP.NET app's SSL URL. So in the Visual Studio, in the Solution Explorer that you see, the Solution Explorer window, I'm going to select the Graph Tutorial project, and then I'm going to select Properties. And what you'll see here is our SSL URL that's listed. I want to copy this value, so we're going to need this in just a minute. Now I'm going to launch the browser, and let's go over to the Azure AD Admin Center. All right, so I'm going to select the Azure AD, and then I'm going to select App Registrations. And from here, I'm going to select a new registration. Now the registration for my app, I'm going to call this my ASP.NET Graph Tutorial. I'm going to set it to the multi-tenant and all the account types to be multi-tenant and all MSA accounts. And for my web, my redirect URI, I'm going to put in the URL. I'm going to put the URL in for my SSL URL for my app inside of Visual Studio. So I'm going to copy that value and come over here and paste this value in right here. And then I'll select Register. Now there's a few things that we're going to need here. We see we have our application ID. We're going to need that a little bit later. So I'm going to copy this value, and I'm just going to create a new file here for a moment. It's just going to be a normal text file, and I'm going to put the app ID in here, and I'm also going to grab the tenant ID as well, because that's another value that you are commonly going to need when you're working with Azure AD. So I'm going to grab that value right here. And the next thing we're going to need is our app secret. So we're going to create a secret for our app. So I'll create an app secret as well. So I'll do that inside of Azure AD. So I'll come over here to the client or certificates and secrets, and I'll create a new client secret. I'll accept all the defaults that are given to me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of the secret value. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to put it right here for safekeeping. The reason why I'm doing that primarily with the secret is because the secret is never going to be displayed again once I've already seen it. The next time I go back to that page, it'll just be masked out. So if I ever needed to reuse that secret, if I didn't keep a copy of it somewhere, I'd have to recreate a new one, which is not a big deal, but just go ahead and grab it now while we can. So what you saw in this demo was just creating an Azure or an ASP.NET MVC web app with Visual Studio, as well as registering an Azure AD app with the Azure AD Admin Center. So now with the application created, I then added in all of the necessary packages and libraries that support authentication and requesting data from Microsoft Graph.